in your regular, in a few weeks, so that
Yeah.
it makes it a little bit better for you guys. But we did end up going to Mass General and switching over to care at Mass General. I showed Dr. Teal the videos of Kaylee in her crib on my little digital camcorder, and she didn't even need to see more than 10 seconds for her to say, that's a seizure. When the neurologists at Boston Children's were saying that she had, like, dystonia, hemiplegic dystonia, that is a rare diagnosis in and of itself. And for her to have that on top of tuberous sclerosis would be unimaginable. Like, dystonia, Dr. Teals always says that if you see something like that in a child with tuberous sclerosis, it's seizure unless proven otherwise. And then if proven otherwise, it's likely behavior, because that's the second most likely thing in tuberous sclerosis. But when it's in an 18-month-old who's waking up from a nap, it's not going to be behavior.
Absolutely.
It's going to be seizure. So she saw her meds and said, well, no wonder she's having spasms. You have her on Lamictal and Topamax, both of which increase spasms. So they took her off. She took her off those, and her seizures were really well controlled for quite some time. And
that's good.
She did pretty well for a while. And then I think seizure-wise, she started to have uncontrolled seizures again around age 4. But I think around 2 years old was when we started the battle also with getting a diagnosis of autism. So, again, a child with tuberous sclerosis. We had her in the study for infants at Boston Children's, where her infants with tuberous sclerosis, looking at EEG correlates for incidence of autism. And so she was getting autism measures frequently, and she was in birth to 3.
I was just going to ask you that.
She was getting intervention, I think, age like 4 months. I think we started 3 or 4 months old.
How was she handling this developmentally?
Her biggest delays at the time were motor, so gross motor, fine motor. But she was saying, she was saying words. She stalled for a while with the spasms, but she did have language. But I had a lot of concerns about the amount of intervention she was getting, was just not enough. And then I started to have concerns about features of autism. And she was social, so and she would point. So those were things that made it difficult for people to diagnose autism in her. So so her team would say, "Oh, we don't think she has autism." So I was always getting notes from Dr. Teal's office stating, the incidence of autism in tuberous sclerosis is very high. I was fighting to get more testing done, constantly advocating for her and with our birth to 3 company, to the point where the director of the birth to 3, actually the owner of the so the way that birth to 3 works in Connecticut is that it's basically privatized. So there's multiple agencies, and they just basically, whatever catchment area you're in, you get a particular agency. So the owner of the agency is a man, and he called my husband and said, you should really learn to control your wife. So you should really learn to control your wife. And my husband was like, there's no controlling her. He was just mad because I was calling him out on the fact that he was not giving the proper amount of services. And I would look up all the different laws and say, he would say, we're capped off at this many hours. She's receiving this many hours. I said, you just have to fill out one form to get her more hours. And there's reasons why you can get more hours, and she fulfills those reasons. And this is about money. You just don't want to do it because you're not going to get as much reimbursement. He didn't like that very much. And so he called my husband.
Wow.
You know, old school, I guess.
Yeah,
but,
that's just
so
distressing.
I did convince him to pay for autism testing. And so we had somebody from UConn come out and test her. They said she's too social. And I really couldn't get around that testing because the person who did it is highly reputable, actually is the creator of the MChat, which is one of the screenings for autism. So she is not just like Joe Schmo PhD.
I get it.
Coming to test. Like she is highly reputable. And so
how frustrating. I mean, to know on some level that she has it, and just having to come up against barrier after barrier.
So she went through all of birth to 3 with no ABA services, no autism services, entered school with no diagnosis of autism. We did enter school with a letter that stated that she had autistic features. And we in Connecticut, there's a law that and I believe actually this was before the law. There's at a time when UConn was still performing a study on their MChat, on their screener, that and your pediatrician's office could opt into the screening, the autism screening. And so our pediatrician's office was in that research study. They would ask you, do you want to do the MChat? And so you fill it out, and it's just a checklist. And if your kid didn't pass the MChat, which means that they had a high likelihood of having autism, then you would get a call from the research team. Do you want to have your child? They would do the further checklist, and then they would say, okay, do you want to have your child evaluated? So this is when she's like just turned 4, something around that age. So that time I'm like, sure, more, free testing, more testing, like another ADOS, and it's free, and my insurance, I don't have to have this one done through the school or through insurance. Sure. So we had this one done there. And a little backstory, I actually got my degree in psychology from UConn. So that doctor who actually made the MChat was one of my professors. I took PhD level classes as an undergrad. And so I know all the people in the clinical psych department there. So I go there, and it was my thesis professor, the person who oversaw my thesis is the person who's going to test her. And I was like, awesome. Because
I'm not ready to say good or bad yet after hearing the story.
I know her. I have a personal relationship with her. I know how reputable she is. And so she's like, Rebecca, what are you doing here? Like, oh, this is your kid. Okay. So her student, works with her to do it. And then she's like, so Kaylee has autism. Yeah. I was like, oh, this is news to me. Yeah, right.
Oh my gosh.
So she's like, what can I do to help you personally? Like, I can go to your PPTs if you want.
Oh, that's great.
We at least had that hurdle crossed, where we had an official diagnosis and documentation of autism. So we went to PPT not too long after that, and we had the district psychologist sitting there, and she said, Kaylee can't have autism. Kaylee can't have autism because she has tuberous sclerosis.
Yes, I do remember having some of those discussions.
How in the world, I'm like, how, can you explain this, please? She can't because she has a diagnosis, it's a medical diagnosis, therefore she cannot have autism. If you look at the checklist, if you have a medical condition, you cannot have autism. And I was like, tuberous sclerosis is the leading genetic cause of epilepsy and autism. And she was like, I have some information here about tuberous sclerosis. And then she proceeds to try to tell me about tuberous sclerosis.
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, could I see what information you have there? She had this like 1996 printout from like some defunct website that I don't even know how she found it online. And I was like, well, this is really interesting considering I've been asking you guys to get some information from Dina Hook at the TS Alliance since Kaylee was 3. And I've also provided you with multiple sources of information there. And so this like started to really solidify the fact that no matter how much information you provide, you just have to keep providing it. And
absolutely.
That it solidified it more how
kind of on your own in a lot of ways, really, forging your own way and believing.
Really to become more of an advocate, and like the educational side started to escalate to become as prominent as the medical side. And so she was 4 when the seizures started to become an issue again. She started having uncontrolled status seizures at that
gosh.
time.
Yeah.
So every 2 weeks or so, sometimes more than that, she would go into status. Nothing would stop them, and we would have to call 911. And so I had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and the 2-year-old, it was always nap time when it would happen. And so I would have a sleepy 2-year-old and a seizing 4-year-old. And there was one time where she seized she seized, and I had to give her multiple doses of medication. It was per her plan.
Were you using Diastat?
With the time we're using Diastat, she stopped breathing. And so I was resuscitating her in the living room, waiting for the ambulance to get here. And Jameson's happily sleeping upstairs. And we didn't come home for another 2 weeks after that because she was in the PICU. She seized for 4.5 hours.
Gosh.
They couldn't get it stopped.
That's like one of the worst, I have to say, of all the experiences I've had is watching that status go on.
That was probably the worst experience of, that's not probably the word, that is the worst experience.
I think, yeah, I'd have to say.
So, she had aspiration pneumonia from that. And so it took some time to get those under control and tweaking of medications. She has a SAGA that's prominent, and some of that could have been attributed as well to a SAGA. So adding on rapamycin and then switching to Afinitor definitely helped. And we don't know if the shrinking of the SAGA or any effect that the Afinitor could have on actual control of seizure actually is what helped to get that, get her stable in terms of that.
Right. The mechanism of action isn't clear.
The mechanism of action isn't clear.
Yeah, I can relate. not sure on some levels with, well, we use sirolimus. What is causing